Jumanji. 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 Jumanji.
Did you know the word Jumanji originates from a South African nation inhabited by the Zulu people, and when translated, it means many effects? Not a lot of people know that, not even the author himself when he first wrote the 1981 children's story. And yes, you heard me right. Before Robin Williams or The Rock were carrying the legacy of this jungle adventure, it was first conceived as an illustrated book that expanded upon the imaginative power needed for an everyday board game, which isn't as prevalent this day and age. When I'm playing the game of life, I'm not trying to place myself in the fictional world thinking what could have been. I'm just making sure I get the best house first. And when I'm playing Monopoly, I'm not pretending to be some money-grubbing tycoon. I'm too busy stressing over the fact that I gotta toss the luckiest roll of my life or else I'm How's it going, bookworms, filmsters? My name is Mike, and I'm sorry to say, but you have fallen into my trap card. And from the looks of it, it seems like you're stuck with me for the next half hour or so. Not to worry though, because I got just the game to pass the time. So get comfy as I act as your trusty guide through this wild ride, taking you on the immediate perils and dangers of this mystic phenomenon known as
Jumanji.
Poor characterization, weak narration from the plunge overtaking the fine over list to the pointless plot. Description so apparent, the romance tells some in the 1,000-yard stare. Book is thick, but nothing will stick. Gotta take my chances, well, that flick. But the worst of all, the reason I weak didn't get far on the 8-page deep.
Where can I find this story?
Bookstore's closed, the cafe's packed, nothing left to do but single it around.
Well, now I'll just
Scan the book, pop in the DVD, and take some time, come read with me.
Jumanji was first introduced to the world as a 1981 fantasy children's book written by Chris Van Allsburg, who was also well known for writing both The Polar Express and this book's sequel, Zathura. The plot is simple. Two bored kids come across this strange board game that, once played, brings about the jungle-themed elements to life until one player reaches the end and shouts Jumanji. The inspiration for this concept came from Van Allsburg's desire to invoke the feeling of cognitive dissonance with the reader. By this, he meant to provide a lot of scenarios that pair together things you could never imagine and could only be explored through the power of imagination. Never in your life would you ever see a lion resting on a piano or a stampede of rhinos bursting through your living room, but with the manifestation of a magical safari board game, those ideas were now possible and further envisioned with his traditional illustration style. And that's all really there is to say. There's nothing much deeper beyond Van Allsburg inventing a really cool concept, and with 34 pages, illustrated the narrative with precise framing, incredible shading, and depth that earned it the Caldecott Medal, along with adaptations that would further expand the idea. The one that really made a staple impact was the 1995 film starring the late and great Robin Williams. Van Allsburg had a hand with one of the earlier scripts, going beyond his own original idea to provide a more mystic and surreal experience that would catch original fans off guard. This movie also had a boost of confidence in his creation since 2 years prior, Jurassic Park was released, and seeing the CGI marvel that movie presented, the Jumanji production team knew that the technology was there to really bring this story to life, along with the combination of expert puppetry. The film released on December 15, 1995 and received pretty good praise, more so for the visual effects than the story. But the question today is, how well did it do as an adaptation? And were the added changes to the game a real improvement? Well, that's what we're going to find out today, so sit back and relax and lock in as we purposely trap ourselves within this wild and extreme gaming session of
Jumanji.
But before we jump into the real meat of the story, our movie begins by establishing the ominous tone for how this board game traveled from point A to point C. First, we're briefly in 1869, following these two boys named Caleb and Benjamin, who are braving these wolf-infested woods to bury this mysterious box. It's not a long scene, but it does enough to express the urgency of this situation based on their faces, and even this response when Benjamin asks what will happen if someone dug it up.
May God have mercy on his soul.
Lucky for them though, they won't live long enough to see it awaken in their generation as the movie jumps a whole century into the future, where we now follow Alan Parrish, a boy whose family name holds a prestige status in this New Hampshire town. He's a friendly face to the townspeople, but not so much with the other kids who don't see any reason to respect the name. It just invites bullying, as shown here with the cyclist chasing him towards his dad's shoe factory. He tries weighing out the vultures until his dad comes out, spelling out the movie's central theme of facing your fears. And you know how I know this is the movie's theme? It's because it never lets you forget it. Now, I'm not gonna act like it isn't noticeable. The moral lesson is about as obvious as a pimple, and the narrative really moves at a fast pace to bring you closer to the main event, which honestly doesn't pose much of an issue since the movie's main strengths were enough to forgive the simplicity. I treated this viewing as if I was going to see a monster movie. If there was an amazing storyline attached, then hey, that's an added bonus. But if there wasn't, I wouldn't really complain because that wasn't what I came for. I just wanted to see a crazy ass monster fight. And that same kind of expectation could be applied here. The book itself was also a simple story with a basic message about finishing what you started, which the movie does promote along with the parallels in being brave and not giving up when the going gets tough. In regards to those aspects, the film is incredibly faithful while still making its mark in the franchise through this haunting setup. Leaving without his dad's support, Alan walks back out of the factory and braces himself for a beating, along with getting his bike stolen. Bruised and stranded, he begins to hear these random drums playing from this nearby construction site. And as he starts closing in on the sound, with literally no adult stopping him or concerned about his presence, he's led to a dirt wall and starts digging out the buried box, breaking the lock to reveal
Jumanji.
Now, it's worth noting here that the previous owners in the book were not as considerate as those two boys in the beginning. The book's discovery of the board game was just as easy as finding it under a tree, with a small note advertising it as a free game, fun for some, but not for all. Like, bruh. Child or not, someone chose to unleash chaos that day with the vaguest description in the world, not caring who the next victim was. However, in the movie, they made a really creative change by transforming the overall nature of Jumanji being this cursed board game. It calls to potential players like a siren, using its ominous drums to lure them close and pique their curiosity. When Alan returns home and opens up the game for the first time, he takes a look at one of the pieces. But when his mom calls him, that piece falls out of his hands and instantly sets itself in place. The game is alive and itching to start a new round, but is forced to wait after Alan gets into a heated argument with his dad over being sent to the family's boarding school, which would do nothing but lead into even more bullying. The conversation ends on bitter terms, and as the parents leave for an important event, Alan plans on running away until he is stopped at the door by his friend Sarah, who was returning his stolen bike. And right there, the two of them begin to hear the call of
Jumanji.
Alan brings Sarah to the game where they inspect the board further, reading the rules and accidentally initiating play with the dice toss. What made the game so innocent in the book is that it looked like any other board game, with simple actions on every space. Lion attacks, move back 2 spaces. Monkey steals food, miss a turn. However, the movie's evolution of the game had the actions for every space told in rhyme and presented through this magic orb in the center, letting players ponder on what the message could mean before the manifestations began. Sarah's first roll summoned some creatures hiding in the fireplace, already freaking them out, so she urged Alan to put the game away. But by the sound of the clock, his hands released another roll, being the most unforgiving play for his first official turn.
In the jungle, you must wait until the dice read 5 or 8.
Unless a 5 or 8 is rolled, Alan would remain trapped inside the game. And as he's crying out to Sarah to keep playing, the wild bats she summoned fly out of the fireplace and scare her out of the house, leaving the game unfinished for 26 years. And here is where our story really begins. Our main protagonists are Judy and Peter Shepard, two kids who have recently lost their parents in a car crash and are now staying with their Aunt Nora, who had just acquired the old parish mansion with plans on turning it into a bed and breakfast. Because of the incident, Peter is known to be a mute and doesn't speak out that often, while Judy speaks nothing but lies and loves it. She does it with such ease and can't help herself, which works in her favor at times when it's needed the most. Other times, she just needs a laugh. So as they're unpacking and settling in, Peter ends up finding the game's bats hanging around in the attic, leading for the family to call pest control the next day. Through word of mouth, the kids learn about the aftermath of Alan's disappearance, how the rumors revolved around him being murdered by his father, chopped up into little pieces, and shoved somewhere in the walls. Well, that explains how they got this mansion so cheap, because who would want to live in a murder house? And it doesn't take long for the quote-unquote murderer to start playing its drums again, catching the attention of the kids. Once their aunt leaves the next morning for the permit office, they follow the sounds back to the attic until it leads them to
Jumanji.
Now from here on out, this review is gonna get a little nitpicky because the majority of the differences come from not only the summoned creatures, but also the order in which they were summoned. Judy is the first to move and summons giant mosquitoes coming to make her itch, sneeze, or twitch until she gives them a good whack out the window. In the book, the only insect-like creatures to be summoned is the tsetse fly, which would induce a sleeping sickness, whereas these mosquitoes are capable of spreading a terrible illness. However, that's a problem for another scene. It's Peter's turn now, and he rolls a pair of snake eyes that summons a bunch of wild monkeys that have aged
Holy.
which is saying something because the rest of the animals look relatively good, but these monkeys, yikes. It is at this point where Judy reads the other side of the board, noting that the game and its content won't end until they reach the center, so they try to end it quick before their aunt returns home. Since Peter rolled a double, he gets to go again, and rolls a 5 that summons a lion, which in the book was the first summoned creature to appear. I like how the movie maintained the same introduction though, where the lion just magically appeared on top of a piano until it hops off and begins to eye its prey. And how they handled this next level threat is slightly different from the book. Peter would run around the house and eventually trap it within a bedroom for the duration of the game, which does happen here, but because he rolled a 5, he released the now adultified Alan Parrish from his captivity, and used this reintroduction to show off the survival skills he developed to survive
Jumanji.
And from here, a staple subplot was born. The concept of a magical board game was already great on its own, but had room for expansion, which this movie fully takes advantage of by exploring the possible consequences we would see in these next couple of scenes. Alan has returned 26 years in the future, and as he leaves his mansion to understand this new reality, slowly comes to terms with the fact that because of his entrapment, his father focused all his attention looking for him, letting the shoe factory go out of business. And with no results, his parents died without ever knowing what truly happened. The story of Alan Parrish carries the heart of this film, along with amazing range provided by Robin Williams. He really embodies the spirit of a kid trapped in a grown man's body, mainly shown through his acts of immaturity. But this is also balanced by the bravery he's cultivated after years of being trapped, making him an expert on the game and its trickery. This type of character will become an ongoing trope for future Jumanji stories and sort of guide the main characters through the twists and turns.
Stay off the white bricks.
What?
And freeze.
But what makes this movie truly unique from the rest is the external consequences. With the animated series and the sequels involving The Rock, Jumanji brought the players into its own universe and kept the danger contained and isolated. This book never concerns itself with showing what happens after the animals are released and focused on the shock value that they're there in the first place. Even with the sequel Zathura, the problems were carried off into space, away from planet Earth. This is the only Jumanji story that entertained the thought of unleashing the game into the real world and becoming adding an extra stake to finish the game quickly. Because we can't have these monkeys stealing cop cars or the mosquitoes infecting random civilians. But the kids won't be able to finish it without Alan's help, and he's pretty reluctant to return. It takes a whole shave and wardrobe change until they eventually trick him into playing with the classic McFly effect.
Come on, Judy. He's not gonna help us. He's afraid.
What did you say?
However, even with Alan on board now, they run into a new issue. Since Judy and Peter have merged with Alan's old game session, they are all now taking turns with each other, including with the one other person who was roped into it long ago, Sarah Whittle. Her life hasn't been easy since that night and has been undergoing a lot of therapy hours to convince herself that none of this ever happened. But unfortunately for her, it all comes back knocking on her doorstep. She's carried like a sack back to the house, and after being momentarily calmed down, Alan tricks her into making the next roll, summoning an environmental effect completely original to the movie that brings about wild vines and carnivorous plants. They manage to survive this turn for the time being and relocate themselves in the study, where they make the solemn pact to finish this game no matter what. Alan makes his move and brings about the 5th summon, which happens to be a human character. The book also introduced a human character, except it was on the 4th turn and not as threatening. He was some kind of safari guide who was incredibly quirky in the sense that he was lost and didn't know where to go. The movie, however, summoned an antagonistic hunter named Van Pelt, who is very acquainted with Alan and spends the rest of the film trying to hunt him down. Alan takes a moment to give Van Pelt a runaround and expel his bullet rounds before returning to the house, bickering with Sarah about the past while Judy continues on with the 6th turn. In the book, this would have been when the CC fly was released, but since the movie already had its mosquitoes, it proceeds with the book's 7th summon, being the wild stampede of rhinos, elephants, zebras, and pelicans charging through and breaking down the wall. The group avoid a fatal trampoline but are too slow to stop a pelican snatching the board game and flying away, forcing the group to chase after it towards a riverbank. Alan uses his survival skills once again to catch a fish with his bare hands and trades for the game, only to let it fall down the stream. It is only thanks to Peter for catching it and avoiding the worst case scenario, but as they are returning home, they are stopped by Carl Bentley. In the past, this man used to work at the Parrish shoe factory, planning to present a shoe prototype to Alan's father. However, Alan accidentally left the shoe on the conveyor belt and broke the machine, to which Carl took the heat for and was fired. Now he works as a policeman during one of the most bizarre days of his life as random animals are popping on the streets causing mayhem. He does a good enough job surviving, but can't say the same for his cruiser. It becomes a running gag for how much damage it takes until it is literally taken away from him. By this point, Carl has seen this group associated with the craziness and finally makes the move to arrest Alan, which couldn't have been more perfect timing. Van Pelt has returned to the chase, now with more advanced weaponry he picked up at a gun shop, but couldn't get a clear shot as Alan willingly placed himself inside the cop car for safety. Meanwhile, with all this going on, Peter checks how many spaces he has left to finish the game, and tries dropping the dice on the needed number, resulting in cheating, and the game doesn't like that one bit, doing a lot more than pushing him back all the way to the start.
Peter, your hands! Look at your hands!
The boy is now going through the monkification process, and nothing can be fixed without Alan. So Sarah takes the kids out into the chaotic city to try and get some bail money, but are quickly confronted by Van Pelt, beginning a chase and struggle over the board game. Monkey Boy tries to scamper off but ends up running into the stampede again and traps himself in the car, allowing Van Pelt to take the game back and hide away in a discount store. Sarah and the kids do their best to handle the hunter with some Home Alone shenanigans, while Alan is gaining Carl's trust by revealing his identity, just in time as the news about Van Pelt is announced through the scanner. Alan takes the wheel and races back towards the town, and with no brakes, drives straight into the store and knocks down an aisle of paint over the hunter, saving Sarah and Judy. Escaping the madness, the group walks back to the mansion, now coated in a thick jungle terrain caused by the vines. That's not enough to stop them from playing though, and their morale is slightly boosted by what Judy points out.
Sarah, if you roll a 12, you win.
This was a direct line from the book, as that's how much was left for Judy herself to finish the game. The difference here is that the book was infinitely more kinder by giving her that exact amount and ending the game right then and there. However, we just have about 20 minutes of the movie left, which is just enough time for more danger. On the 7th turn in the book, that's when the stampede was unleashed, but here, Sarah summons a monsoon, which in the book was summoned very early on as the 3rd turn, and the only real threat was a light rain shower happening indoors. In the movie though, the conditions are more perilous by the rising water levels and the infestation of man-eating crocodiles. The group swims to safety, finding shelter on the chandelier, but Sarah almost becomes Croco Chow until Alan jumps to her rescue and starts flexing his skills as a gator wrestler. Meanwhile, by this point, Carl and Aunt Nora have crossed paths and make their way towards the mansion, unaware of the trapped monsoon behind the doors, and save the group by releasing the flood into the world. They survive yet another round and escape towards the attic to finish the game quickly, but maybe a little too quick. On the book's 8th turn, a python was summoned and hanging over the fireplace. The movie's 8th turn sunk Alan through a pit of quicksand. He tries holding his head high until Judy plays her turn, which, like the book, doesn't summon anything crazy and simply affects her placement on the board. The same can't be said for Monkey Boy though, who summons an army of plastic Party City spiders to attack the group, which honestly is way better than what the book unleashed on its 10th turn. Instead of spiders, a volcano erupted and left the room in a little floor as lava scenario until colliding with the wetness from the monsoon and evaporated into steam. This outcome is a lot more manageable and led into one of my favorite scenes from this movie. Alan tells Monkey Boy to retrieve an axe from the woodshed, so he's running as fast as he can. But damn, there's a lock on the shed. Wasting no time, Monkey Boy grabs the nearest axe and starts breaking the lock so he can rush in and get the... Wait a minute. It's such a silly moment, I just can't help but laugh. That face said all that needed to be said. So after riding the big kahuna, Aunt Nora returns to her jungle home and can't believe what she's seen. Half a man peeking through the ceiling, a lion chilling on the queen, and her hairy little nephew. Yeah. Yeah, she needs some private closet time. Monkey Boy arrives a little too late as a wildflower neutralizes Judy, giving her just enough strength to pass the game on to Sarah. Without her hands, she spits the dice out and summons an earthquake on her 11th turn, which in the book just gave Judy an extra roll for discovering the shortcut. With the house breaking in two, Alan is released from his floor prison and starts swinging on the vine to save the board game from falling into oblivion, and lands back inside the living room. It's his turn now, but Van Pelt appears and holds him hostage, forcing him to drop the dice in his hands. As the tension builds around the final number, Alan stands his ground and quits running, ready to take a bullet until the die finally stops and leads Alan straight to
Jumanji.
At the very last second, the game recognizes the winner and begins to suck all the animals and Van Pelt back into the board, with the biggest surprise being that it has also transported Alan and Sarah back to the point in time when they started the game. Now, this is nothing short of a pleasant miracle. No one could have guessed that this would be possible, but it truly is a blessing for these two who had their lives uprooted from this experience. It's noted later that their memories of the future will quickly fade, so there's no chance for them to carry that wisdom with them. But that shouldn't discount the second chance they were granted, as Sarah no longer has to grow up with the reputation of a crazy woman, and Alan, after spending so many years alone, makes up with his dad. But one thing they vowed never to forget were the two kids who helped restore their lives. Jumping back to the present, the parish house is thriving and both Alan and Susan are hosting a Christmas party where they are reunited with Peter and Judy, who have no recollection of their adventures but were also given a happy ending since their parents are alive and well in this new timeline. And Alan makes sure that they both avoid that accident at all costs. Seems like all is right in the world, but what about the board game? What became the fate of
Jumanji?
Well, how the book and movie handled the game are different, with the book being the cool tie-in to its sequel, Zathura. Peter and Judy would carelessly put the game back where they found it, only for it to be later picked up by Danny and Walter Budwing, the leading kids for the follow-up space adventure. Of course, the movie had no plans to follow along with the sequel and isn't directly making any connections, so it ends with Alan and Sarah tossing it over the bridge and hoping it disappears into the depths of the sea. Because it sure would be a shame if the game was picked up on a random shore, rejected by its next victim, and gets with the times by transforming itself into a video game cartridge. I can't believe that actually happened. But there you have it. We have survived
Jumanji.
a simple concept full of creative possibilities. That's the best way to look at the original book in relation to the sequels it produced. Reading it now, the story is incredibly dated with an idea that, since its publication, has been massively improved on. And the addition of Robin Williams' audiobook for the story's 30th anniversary doesn't change that fact. But that doesn't diminish its influence as the primary foundation of a memorable jungle adventure. Each adaptation does a promising job to uphold the spirit of the book and emphasizes the level of imagination that should be explored with this story. This first adaptation though stayed incredibly faithful to the original while still flourishing with its own identity and building upon the elements of what would make a good Jumanji story. Giving the board a spiritual evil that traps players into a game session with the potential to ruin their world or livelihoods. Going in this direction evolved the original narrative with the times and transformed it in a way that would captivate the decade's current audience. Aside from the monkeys and spiders, the visual and practical effects hold up pretty well and doesn't break your immersion during the action portions. The only real downside was the simplicity of the plot, which again wasn't much of an issue when you consider that the visuals, pacing, and performances were strong enough to carry the film and produce an engaging popcorn flick. The book may have introduced Jumanji into the world, but it was this movie that really kept the name alive for many generations and imaginative ideas to come. With that said, those are my final thoughts on Jumanji. And as always, it's just one man's opinion. So what'd you guys think of the book and or movie? Be sure to leave a like, subscribe, comment your thoughts down below, and I'll see y'all in the next review. Take care, guys.